Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. I never believed in the stories they told about Sam Houston National Forest until what happened to me out there. My name is Jennifer Hayes, I'm 42 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. The plan was simple. Take my teenage daughter Chloe on a mother-daughter camping trip to help us reconnect after her father's death 6 months earlier. We'd been drifting apart since the funeral, Chloe retreating into her phone and her room while I threw myself into work, both of us avoiding the grief that sat between us like a third person at every meal. A weekend in the woods might be good for both of us, my therapist had suggested. Somewhere quiet, where you can talk without distractions. Sam Houston National Forest seemed perfect. Close enough to Houston for a weekend trip, but remote enough to feel like a real escape. I'd rented a 28-foot Class C motorhome from a place in Conroe. Something modest but comfortable with separate sleeping areas and a dinette where Chloe and I could play cards or just talk. "Do we have to?" Chloe had asked when I first proposed the trip. At 16, she was all elbows and attitude. Her father's dark eyes and my stubborn streak combined in ways that could be either wonderful or exhausting. "Yes, we have to. 2 days, no phones, no internet, just us." She'd rolled those dark eyes in the way that reminded me so painfully of David. "Fine, but I'm bringing books. Bring all the books you want." The drive from Houston took us through increasingly forested terrain, the urban sprawl giving way to stands of pine and oak that grew denser with each mile. We'd reserved a spot at Double Lake Recreation Area, a campground deep in the forest where the ranger assured me we'd have plenty of privacy and hiking trails suitable for beginners. "It's pretty," Chloe admitted as we pulled into our campsite, and I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be the disaster I'd been secretly fearing. Our site was nestled among towering loblolly pines, with a picnic table and fire ring surrounded by dense forest. The nearest occupied site was 50 yards away, and beyond that, nothing but trees stretching away into green shadows. "Look at this," I said, stepping out of the motorhome and breathing in the scent of pine and rich earth. "When's the last time you heard silence like this?" Chloe pulled out her phone and frowned at the screen. "There's no signal. That's the point, honey." We spent the first afternoon setting up camp and exploring the immediate area. There was a small lake about a quarter mile through the trees, its surface dark and still beneath the canopy. A few other campers were visible across the water, but they seemed as interested in solitude as we were. "This is nice," Chloe said as we sat on a fallen log beside the lake, watching dragonflies skim the surface. "Peaceful." "Your dad would have loved this place," I said, then immediately regretted bringing him up. We'd been having such a normal conversation. But instead of shutting down the way she usually did when David was mentioned, Chloe nodded. "He always wanted to take me camping, remember? He kept talking about getting a tent and teaching me to fish. He would have been terrible at camping," I said, smiling despite the ache in my chest. "Remember how he couldn't even start the barbecue grill without reading the instructions 3 times? Chloe actually laughed, a sound I realized I hadn't heard from her in months. He would have brought a camping manual and tried to follow it step by step. We talked about David for another hour, sharing memories and stories, and for the first time since his heart attack, it felt healing rather than devastating. Maybe this trip was exactly what we needed. That evening, as we sat around our campfire roasting marshmallows, I noticed something odd about the flames. Instead of the usual orange and yellow, they seemed to flicker with hints of blue and green, creating colors I'd never seen in a fire before. "Mom, look at this," Chloe said, holding up her phone. "The camera's acting weird." She showed me the screen, where she'd been trying to take a selfie of us by the fire, but instead of our faces, the image showed 2 different people entirely. A middle-aged man with a beard and a young boy, both looking directly at the camera with expressions of confusion and fear. "That's strange," I said, taking the phone and examining the image. "Must be some kind of glitch. Old photos stored in the memory or something." But when I tried to take a picture myself, the same thing happened. The camera showed strangers instead of us. Different people each time, all with that same look of confusion and growing fear. "Let me try something," Chloe said, taking back the phone and opening the front-facing camera to use it like a mirror. What we saw made us both gasp and stumble backward from the fire. The screen showed our campsite, but it wasn't empty. A dozen people stood around our fire. Men, women, children of various ages, all translucent and shimmering like heat mirages. They were all looking directly at us with expressions of desperate hunger, their mouths moving as if they were speaking, but we couldn't hear any sound. I grabbed the phone and turned it off, my hands shaking. Equipment malfunction. The screen must be damaged or something. But Chloe was looking past me at something behind my shoulder, her face pale in the firelight. "Mom," she whispered, "turn around." Slowly. I turned, and my blood went cold. Scattered throughout the trees around our campsite were mirrors. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Antique hand mirrors, modern bathroom mirrors, compact mirrors, even broken pieces of reflective glass, all hanging from branches or propped against tree trunks. They caught the firelight and threw it back in fractured patterns that made the forest look like a hall of mirrors at a carnival. "Where did those come from?" I breathed. "They weren't there this afternoon," Chloe said with certainty. "I would have noticed." We stood back to back, turning slowly to take in the full scope of what surrounded us. Every tree within 50 feet of our campsite had mirrors attached to it, creating a circle of reflection that trapped us in the center like insects in a web. "We need to leave," I said, moving toward the motorhome. "Right now." But when I tried to start the engine, nothing happened. The battery was dead, despite the fact that we'd been running the generator just an hour earlier. The lights were out, the refrigerator silent, all our electrical systems completely drained. "The ranger station," Chloe suggested. "We can walk there and get help." I grabbed my flashlight and tried to switch it on, but the beam was weak and flickering. Still, it was better than nothing. We locked the motorhome and started walking down the dirt road that led back to the main campground. But after walking for what should have been 10 minutes, we found ourselves back at our campsite. "That's impossible," I said, staring at our dead campfire and the circle of mirrors. We walked straight down the road. "Maybe we got turned around in the dark," Chloe said, but her voice was tight with fear. We tried again, this time staying strictly on the road and using the flashlight to mark our progress. But no matter which direction we walked, no matter how carefully we navigated, we always ended up back at our campsite within 15 minutes. "We're trapped," Chloe whispered. The mirrors seemed to multiply as the night wore on. Every time I looked around, there were more of them, reflecting our frightened faces back at us from impossible angles. And in some of them, I began to see things that weren't there. Shadows moving independently, faces that weren't ours looking back at us, scenes that showed our campsite but populated with different people. "Don't look at them," I told Chloe, pulling her close. "Something's wrong with those mirrors. They're showing us things that aren't real." But it was impossible not to look. The mirrors drew the eye like magnets, and each one showed something different. In one, I saw a family of 4 setting up a tent on our campsite, the parents arguing while their children played nearby. In another, a lone man sat by a fire, writing in a journal with hands that shook with fear. A third showed 2 teenage boys sharing a joint and laughing, completely unaware of the danger surrounding them. "Mom," Chloe said, pointing at a large bathroom mirror propped against a pine tree. "Look at that one." The mirror showed our campsite, but from a different time. The sun was shining, and David was there, alive and healthy, trying to set up a tent while Chloe laughed at his incompetence with the stakes and guy lines. It was exactly the camping trip we'd never gotten to take, playing out in perfect detail. "It's not real," I said, but tears were streaming down my face. "He's gone, honey. This is just some kind of trick. But what if it's not?" Chloe moved closer to the mirror, her hand reaching out toward the glass. "What if there's a way to—" "No!" I grabbed her wrist before she could touch the surface. "Don't touch the mirrors. Whatever this is, whatever's happening here, touching them will make it worse." But even as I said it, I found myself staring at the image of David, my heart breaking all over again at the sight of his smile, the sound of his laughter echoing impossibly from the silent glass. Around 3 a.m., we heard voices. They seemed to come from every direction at once. Conversations, arguments, laughter, crying, all blending together into a cacophony of human emotion. But when we looked around, we saw no one except the ghostly figures reflected in the mirrors. "Help us," a woman's voice called out, seeming to come from a compact mirror hanging from a low branch. "We've been trying to leave for so long." "The mirrors trap you," said a man's voice from another reflection. "Once you see yourself in them, you can't get out." "Don't listen to them," I told Chloe, covering her ears with my hands. "They're trying to confuse us." But the voices were so real, so desperate, and in the mirrors I could see the speakers clearly. Dozens of people of all ages, all wearing the clothes of different time periods. Some looked like they'd been camping in the 1960s, others more recent. All of them had the same expression of trapped desperation. "We came here to camp," an elderly man explained from a cracked hand mirror. "Just like you. But the mirrors appeared, and now we can't leave. Time doesn't work right here. We age, but we don't die. We hunger, but we can't starve. We're stuck between the world of the living and whatever comes after." "That's impossible," I said. "Look around you," a young woman's voice replied. "Does any of this seem possible?" She had a point. The mirrors continued to multiply, now covering every surface in sight. They hung from branches, leaned against tree trunks, floated impossibly in midair. Each one showed a different scene, a different time, a different group of people who had made the mistake of camping in this cursed place. "There has to be a way out," I said. "People don't just disappear. Someone would have noticed all these missing campers." "They do notice," said an older woman from a Victorian-era hand mirror. "They search for a while, then give up. The forest makes sure no one looks too hard. Time moves differently here. What feels like days to us might be minutes in the real world, or maybe years. We don't know anymore." As dawn broke through the canopy, the mirrors began to fade slightly, becoming less opaque but not disappearing entirely. We could see through them to the forest beyond, but the reflections remained, showing us glimpses of all the people trapped in this place. "During the day, it's easier to resist," explained a teenage boy from a shaving mirror. "The pull isn't as strong, but every night they multiply again, and every night it gets harder to remember who you were before you came here." Chloe had been unusually quiet during this exchange, staring at one particular mirror, a full-length bedroom mirror that showed her and David playing catch in our backyard, both of them laughing in the golden light of a summer evening that had never happened. "What if we stayed?" she said suddenly. "What if we stopped trying to leave?" "Chloe, no. He's right there, Mom. I can see him. I can almost hear his voice." She took a step toward the mirror. "Maybe this is where we're supposed to be. Maybe this is how we get him back." "It's not him," I said, grabbing her arm. "It's just a reflection, a trick. David is gone, honey. I know that hurts. I know you miss him, but staying here won't bring him back." "How do you know?" Chloe's eyes were bright with tears and desperate hope. "How do you know this isn't real?" Before I could answer, the reflection of David looked up from the game of catch and seemed to see us watching. He smiled and waved, mouthing words I couldn't hear but understood. "Come and play." "See?" Chloe said. "He knows we're here. He wants us to join him." The other trapped souls were watching this exchange with expressions of recognition and pity. They'd all been through this moment. This choice between accepting their fate and fighting to return to a world that held both pain and possibility. "It's not your husband," the elderly man said gently. "It's what you want to see, what you need to see. The mirrors show us our deepest desires, our greatest regrets. But it's not real. It's just another kind of prison. But it feels real," Chloe whispered. "Feeling real isn't the same as being real," I said, pulling her away from the mirror. "Your father loved you more than anything in the world. Do you really think he'd want you trapped in a place like this? Do you think he'd want you to give up your whole life just to see a reflection of him?" Chloe looked back at the mirror, where David was still playing catch with a version of herself that would never grow up, never graduate high school, never fall in love or have children of her own. The reflection was beautiful and perfect and utterly lifeless. "No," she said finally. "He'd want me to live. He'd want me to be happy. Then we need to find a way out of here." I spent the morning questioning the trapped souls, trying to understand the rules of this place. What I learned was both terrifying and oddly hopeful. The mirrors appeared to be connected to grief, to loss, to the human tendency to become trapped in our own reflections of what might have been. Everyone here had come to the forest carrying some kind of emotional wound. Death of a loved one, divorce, job loss, betrayal. The mirrors fed on that pain, offering false comfort in exchange for freedom. "But some people do escape," admitted a woman who'd been trapped since the 1980s. "Not many, but some. The ones who can let go of what they've lost and choose the uncertainty of the future over the false certainty of the past." "How?" I asked. "You have to break the mirrors," said the teenage boy. "All of them. But you can't do it with anger or violence. That just makes them stronger. You have to break them with acceptance, with the willingness to let go of what they're showing you." It sounded impossible. How do you willingly destroy the only remaining connection to someone you love? How do you choose uncertainty over the perfect past that never was? But as I watched Chloe staring longingly at the reflection of her father, I knew we had to try. We couldn't live our lives trapped in grief no matter how beautiful the prison might be. That afternoon, I gathered stones from around the campsite while Chloe watched. The trapped souls in the mirrors observed silently, some encouraging, others pleading with us not to destroy their only connection to the people they'd lost. "Are you ready?" I asked Chloe. She looked one last time at the mirror showing her perfect day with David, then nodded. "I'm ready." We started with the smaller mirrors, the hand mirrors and compacts. Each one shattered with a sound like breaking crystal. And with each break, I felt something inside me shift and release. The grief was still there, but it no longer felt like a weight dragging me down. "It's working," called out one of the trapped souls. "I can feel it. The connection is weakening." But the larger mirrors fought back. As we approached the full-length mirror showing David, it seemed to pulse with its own light. The reflection became more vivid, more real. David looked directly at us and spoke, his voice somehow audible despite the silence of the glass. "Don't leave me here alone," he said. "I've been waiting for you. We can be together forever." Chloe hesitated, her stone raised above her head. "Mom, what if it really is him? What if we're making a mistake?" I looked at the reflection of my husband, so perfect and alive and exactly as I remembered him. For a moment, I wavered. How could I destroy this last connection to the man I'd loved for 20 years? But then I noticed something the false David couldn't hide. There was no growth in his eyes, no change or evolution. He was exactly as he'd been the day he died, frozen in time like a photograph. The real David had been always changing, always learning, always becoming more than he'd been the day before. "It's not him," I said with certainty. "The David I married wouldn't want us to stop living. He'd want us to grieve him, to miss him, but then to move forward and build something new." I raised my stone and brought it down on the mirror's surface. The glass exploded outward in a shower of silver fragments, and with it, the spell that held us broke. The other mirrors began shattering on their own, creating a symphony of breaking glass that echoed through the forest. The trapped souls cried out in joy and terror as they were finally released from their reflective prisons. "Thank you," the elderly man called out as his mirror dissolved. "Thank you for setting us free." One by one, the reflections faded, the trapped souls moving on to whatever came next. Some went peacefully, others with reluctance, but all of them finally able to leave the place that had held them for so long. When the last mirror shattered, the forest fell silent except for the normal sounds of birds and wind through the pines. Our motorhome's engine started on the first try, and the road back to civilization appeared exactly where it should have been. "Did that really happen?" Chloe asked as we drove away from the campsite. "I think so, but maybe it doesn't matter if it was real or not. What matters is what we learned. What did we learn?" I thought about it as we navigated the winding forest roads. That grief is normal, that missing people we love is part of being human, but we can't let that grief trap us. We have to keep living, keep growing, keep becoming who we're meant to be. Chloe was quiet for a while, then said, "I miss Dad. I miss him too. I probably always will. But I think he'd want us to miss him while we're living full lives, not while we're trapped in the past. Yeah, she agreed. He would. We drove home in comfortable silence, both of us changed by our experience in the forest. The grief was still there, but it felt different now. Less like a prison and more like a reminder of how much we'd loved and been loved. That was 2 years ago. Chloe is a senior in high school now, planning for college and dating a boy who reminds me of her father in all the best ways. I've started dating again too, something I never thought I'd be ready for. The grief is still there, but it no longer defines us. Sometimes I wonder about the other people who might stumble into that place, drawn by their own losses and regrets. I hope they're stronger than we were, or luckier. I hope they can resist the temptation to trade their futures for perfect reflections of their past. But if they can't, if they find themselves trapped in that hall of mirrors deep in Sam Houston National Forest, I hope they remember what we learned. That love doesn't require us to stop living. Real love wants us to grow, to change, to become more than we were. The mirrors show us what we think we want. Perfect moments frozen in time, free from pain and loss and uncertainty. But life isn't meant to be perfect. It's meant to be lived, with all its messiness and heartbreak and unexpected joys. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is to let them go, to break the mirrors that keep us trapped in the past, and to choose the uncertain future over the beautiful lie of what might have been. The forest is still there, of course, still beautiful, still dangerous to those who enter it carrying too much grief and not enough hope. The mirrors might return. Reflections of loss have a way of multiplying in dark places. But for now, Chloe and I are free. We're living in the present, planning for the future, and carrying our love for David with us like a light instead of a chain. And on the good days, when the grief feels manageable and the future looks bright, I think I can feel him smiling, not from a mirror or reflection, but from wherever love goes when the people who carry it learn to live again. We should have never gone to Palo Duro Canyon. I'm Robert Chen. I was 36 back then. And this is the story of how I lost everything. The company retreat was Lisa's idea. She'd just been promoted to regional manager at the software firm where we both worked, and she wanted to do something special for her team. Something that would build morale and get everyone away from the office politics that had been wearing us all down. Team building in the great outdoors, she'd announced at the Monday morning meeting. 4 days, 3 nights in Palo Duro Canyon. We'll rent a big RV, do some hiking, maybe catch the outdoor musical. It'll be fun. There were 8 of us total. Lisa and myself, our colleagues Martinez and Susan from accounting, the new hire Kevin, who was fresh out of college, Diane, the office manager who'd been with the company since dinosaurs roamed the earth, and Paul from IT, who never spoke unless directly addressed, but somehow knew everything about everyone. The 8th member was Amanda, Lisa's assistant, a quiet woman in her early 30s who always seemed to be watching everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. We rented a massive Class A motorhome, 40 feet of luxury on wheels with slide-outs, a full kitchen, and enough sleeping space for everyone. The plan was to drive from Dallas to Amarillo on Thursday evening, spend Friday through Sunday exploring the canyon, and drive back Monday morning. "This is going to be amazing," Lisa said as we loaded our gear into the RV's cavernous storage compartments. "When's the last time any of us got out of the city for more than a weekend?" I had to admit, she had a point. We'd all been working 60-hour weeks for months, buried in code and spreadsheets and client meetings. The idea of 3 days in Texas's most spectacular natural wonder was genuinely appealing. The drive to Amarillo was uneventful. Good music, bad jokes, and the gradual transition from urban sprawl to the endless grasslands of the Panhandle. We arrived at Palo Duro Canyon State Park just as the sun was setting, painting the massive canyon walls in shades of red and gold that took our breath away. "Holy shit," Kevin breathed, staring out at the vista. I had no idea it was this big. None of us had, really. Palo Duro is the second largest canyon in the United States, a geological marvel carved over millions of years by the Prairie Dog Town fork of the Red River. Standing on the rim, looking down into its depths, it was easy to feel insignificant. 8 tiny humans dwarfed by the immensity of geological time. Our campsite was in the Mesquite camping area, a loop of RV sites nestled among juniper trees near the canyon rim. The massive motorhome barely fit in the site, but we managed to get everything connected and leveled just as full darkness fell. "Who's up for a night hike?" Martinez suggested as we sat around the campfire we'd built in the metal ring. "I brought headlamps for everyone." "Is that safe?" Susan asked. She was in her 50s, cautious by nature and clearly uncomfortable with the idea of wandering around a canyon in the dark. "The trails are well marked," Lisa said, consulting a park brochure. "And it's supposed to be a full moon tonight. Could be beautiful." I was about to suggest we wait until morning when Amanda spoke up. She'd been unusually quiet during the drive, staring out the windows with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We shouldn't go into the canyon at night," she said firmly. "Why not?" Paul asked. It was probably the first time I'd heard him initiate a conversation. Amanda was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I've been reading about this place. The Comanche called it the Sleeping Canyon. They believed there were spirits down there that shouldn't be disturbed after dark. Native American folklore," Martinez said dismissively. "Every place has stories like that. Maybe. But 3 people have gone missing in this canyon over the past 2 years. All of them were found days later, miles from where they disappeared, with no memory of how they got there. The Park Service thinks it's people getting disoriented in the dark, but..." She shrugged. "The Comanche might have known something we don't." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Susan looked relieved to have an excuse to stay at camp, but I could see the skepticism in Martinez's eyes and the curiosity in Kevin's. "Well, I think we should respect the local culture," Lisa said diplomatically. "We can explore the canyon tomorrow when we can actually see where we're going." But as we sat around the fire, I found myself staring down into the dark depths of the canyon, trying to make out shapes in the moonlight. There was something mesmerizing about that vast darkness, something that seemed to pull at the edge of consciousness like a half-remembered dream. "Anyone else feeling sleepy?" Diane asked around 10 p.m. "I'm usually a night owl, but something about this place is making me drowsy." She was right. Despite the excitement of being in a new place, despite the caffeine from dinner, I was finding it hard to keep my eyes open. One by one, we drifted off to our bunks in the RV, leaving the fire to burn down to embers. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to find my bunk empty and the RV door standing open. At first, I thought someone had just stepped outside to use the bathroom facilities, but when I checked, everyone else was gone. All 7 of my colleagues had vanished, leaving their phones, wallets, and shoes behind. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, calling their names softly so as not to wake other campers. No response. The campground was eerily quiet. No sounds from neighboring RVs, no night birds, no insects. Just silence so profound it felt oppressive. That's when I saw them. My colleagues were walking single file along the canyon rim, moving with the slow, measured pace of sleepwalkers. Their eyes were open but unfocused, and they all wore the same peaceful expression as if they were experiencing beautiful dreams. "Lisa," I called, running after them. "Everyone, wake up." But they didn't respond to my voice, didn't even seem to hear me. They continued walking toward a trailhead I hadn't noticed before, a narrow path that led down into the canyon, marked only by a small wooden sign I couldn't read in the darkness. I caught up with Lisa and grabbed her arm, but she shook me off with surprising strength and kept walking. Her skin felt cold to the touch, and when I looked into her eyes, I saw nothing. No recognition, no awareness, just a blank stare focused on something I couldn't see. One by one, my colleagues descended into the canyon, following the narrow trail as it switched back down the cliff face. I followed as best I could, using my flashlight to navigate the treacherous path, but they moved with supernatural confidence in the darkness, never stumbling or hesitating despite the dangerous drop-offs on either side. The trail led to the canyon floor, where it joined a wider path that followed the course of a mostly dry creek. My colleagues continued their sleepwalking march, heading deeper into the canyon toward formations I couldn't make out in the darkness. "Please," I called after them, "you need to wake up. This isn't safe." but my voice seemed to be absorbed by the canyon walls, creating no echo, no response. The silence was so complete it felt like walking through a vacuum. After what felt like hours of following the sleepwalking group, we reached a place where the canyon opened into a wide amphitheater surrounded by towering red rock formations. In the center was something that made no sense. A perfect circle of grass maybe 50 feet across, bright green and lush despite the arid climate. My colleagues walked to the edge of this circle and lay down, arranging themselves like spokes of a wheel with their heads pointing toward the center. Within moments, they were breathing deeply and evenly, clearly in REM sleep. I tried everything I could think of to wake them. I shook them, shouted at them, even threw water from my bottle on their faces. Nothing worked. They slept with the profound stillness of the dead, unresponsive to any external stimulus. As dawn broke over the canyon rim, painting the rock formations in shades of pink and gold, I began to understand the magnitude of our situation. We were miles from the campground, down trails that hadn't appeared on any park map. My phone had no signal, and I had no idea how to find my way back. But more disturbing than being lost was the change in my colleagues. In the growing light, I could see that something fundamental had shifted in their appearance. Their faces were peaceful but somehow empty, as if some essential part of them had been removed. They looked like beautiful shells, breathing but not truly alive. What did you do to them? I spun around to find Amanda standing behind me, fully awake and alert. Unlike the others, she showed no signs of the supernatural sleep that had claimed the rest of our group. Amanda, thank God. I was following them, trying to get them to wake up, but... You weren't affected, she interrupted, studying me with those sharp eyes. Interesting. Most people are. Most people are what? What's happening here? Amanda walked to the edge of the grass circle, careful not to step inside. This is what the Comanche were trying to warn people about. They called this place the Dreaming Ground, a place where the boundary between sleeping and waking becomes thin. That doesn't explain anything, doesn't it? She gestured toward our sleeping colleagues. Look at them, Robert. Really look. What do you see? I studied the 7 figures arranged in their perfect circle and gradually became aware of what had been bothering me since sunrise. They were all breathing in perfect synchronization, their chests rising and falling in exact unison, and their faces, peaceful as they were, showed no sign of the rapid eye movement that should accompany deep sleep. They're not just sleeping, I realized. They're connected somehow. The Comanche believed that certain places hold the dreams of the earth itself, Amanda explained. Ancient dreams, geological dreams, dreams that existed before humans walked the earth. Sometimes those dreams are so powerful they can pull human consciousness into them. And you know this how? Amanda was quiet for a moment, then said, Because I've been here before. 3 years ago, with a different group of people, I was the only one who woke up, the only one who made it out. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. You knew this would happen. You brought us here deliberately. I brought you here because I need help. The others, the ones from 3 years ago, they're still down here somewhere, still sleeping in the Earth's dreams. I've been trying to find them, trying to wake them up, but I can't do it alone. Why us? Why our office? Because you're software developers. You understand systems, connections, networks, and because, she hesitated, because some of you have the right kind of minds. Minds that can resist the pull of the dreaming. Like me, like you, and like Lisa. Potentially, if we can reach her before she goes too deep. I looked down at Lisa's peaceful face, remembering the woman who'd organized this trip, who'd been so excited about team building and getting everyone out of the office. How long do we have? 3 days. After that, the connection becomes permanent. They'll be lost in the Earth's dreams forever, and their bodies will simply fade away. I wanted to run, to get as far away from this impossible place as possible. But, looking at my sleeping colleagues, people I'd worked with for years, shared coffee breaks and deadlines and office gossip with, I knew I couldn't leave them. What do we need to do? Amanda smiled for the first time since I'd known her. We need to go deeper into the canyon. find the source of the dreaming. And we need to do it without falling asleep ourselves. The journey deeper into Palo Duro revealed landscapes that shouldn't have existed. We followed game trails that led through hidden valleys filled with vegetation that belonged in tropical rainforests, past streams that flowed uphill, under rock formations that seemed to shift and change when we weren't looking directly at them. The canyon is dreaming, Amanda explained as we navigated increasingly surreal terrain. Reality becomes fluid here, shaped by the unconscious mind of the earth itself. We found the first group of sleepers in a meadow of purple grass beneath a waterfall that fell upward into the sky. 7 people arranged in a perfect circle, just like our colleagues, breathing in synchrony while their minds wandered through geological dreams. My hiking group from 3 years ago, Amanda said, kneeling beside a middle-aged man whose peaceful face was somehow familiar. I've been trying to reach them ever since. The second group was arranged around a grove of trees that bore fruit made of crystallized light. The third lay sleeping in a field of flowers that sang harmony when the wind touched them. All told, we found over 30 people scattered throughout the dreamscape of the canyon. Hikers, campers, park rangers, all trapped in the Earth's eternal sleep. How many people know about this? I asked. The Park Service suspects something, but they can't acknowledge it officially. Too many lawsuits, too much liability. They've closed some of the trails where people disappear most often, but new ones keep opening up. We were following a path made of compressed starlight when we finally reached the source, a cavern in the canyon wall that seemed to pulse with its own bioluminescent rhythm. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, geometric patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human vision could process. The heart of the dreaming, Amanda whispered. This is where it all starts. Inside the cavern was the most beautiful and terrifying sight I'd ever witnessed. The walls were lined with crystalline formations that contained sleeping figures, not recent victims like our colleagues, but ancient sleepers who had been drawn into the Earth's dreams centuries or millennia ago. Native Americans, Spanish explorers, frontier settlers, all preserved in crystalline sleep, their faces peaceful and eternal. At the center of the cavern was a pool of water so still it looked like black glass. But as we approached, I could see that it wasn't reflecting our faces. It was showing us dreams. The surface rippled with images of vast geological processes, of continents shifting and mountains rising, of the slow dance of evolution across millions of years. The Earth's memory, Amanda breathed. Every moment of geological time preserved in dreams. It's beautiful, I said, and meant it. Despite the horror of our situation, there was something magnificent about witnessing the planet's own consciousness, its dreams of deep time and slow change. Beautiful and deadly, Amanda agreed. Look. She pointed to the edge of the pool, where Lisa was walking with the same sleepwalking gait we'd seen earlier. She must have awakened and followed us, drawn by the same force that had claimed the others. "Lisa, stop," I called, but she didn't respond. She stepped into the pool, and immediately the black water began to crystallize around her feet. "She's being absorbed into the dream," Amanda said urgently. "We have maybe minutes before it's permanent." I didn't think. I just acted. I plunged into the pool after Lisa, feeling the strange water close over my head like thick liquid silk, and suddenly I was inside the Earth's dreams. The experience was indescribable. I was simultaneously a single grain of sand and a towering mountain range, a microscopic organism and a vast ecosystem. I experienced the slow patience of stone, the urgent growth of forests, the ebb and flow of ancient seas. Time moved at geological speed. Seconds that felt like millennia, eons that passed in heartbeats. Somewhere in this vast dreaming, I found Lisa. She was standing in a field of flowers that were simultaneously galaxies, watching the birth and death of stars with tears of joy streaming down her face. "It's so beautiful, Robert," she said when she saw me. "I never knew the universe was so alive, so aware. We're all connected. Every atom, every molecule, every thought." "I know," I said, and I did. The Earth's dreams were showing me truths about existence that human language couldn't contain. But we can't stay here. This isn't our dream to dream. Why not? What do we have back there that's better than this? It was a question that went to the heart of everything. What did we have in our ordinary lives that could compare to the cosmic perspective we were experiencing here? Deadlines and meetings and traffic jams versus the eternal dance of creation itself. But then I thought about choice, about the freedom to make our own mistakes and find our own meanings. The Earth's dreams were beautiful but passive, an eternal sleep that offered peace at the cost of agency. We have the chance to wake up, I said finally, to choose what to dream ourselves. Lisa studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. How do we get out? Together, hold my hand, and remember who you chose to be before you came here. The journey back to individual consciousness was like swimming up from the deepest ocean depths. The Earth's dreams pulled at us, trying to keep us in their vast, impersonal embrace. But step by step, moment by moment, we climbed back toward our smaller, more fragile, more human awareness. We broke the surface of the pool, gasping and choking, immediately pulling each other toward the shore. Amanda was waiting for us, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I'd lost you both," she said. "The others?" I asked, still sleeping. "But look." She pointed to the crystalline formations around the cavern walls. The ancient sleepers were beginning to stir, their eyes opening for the first time in centuries. Somehow, our escape from the Earth's dreams had weakened the hold it had on all its prisoners. We spent the next hour helping people wake up, some from our camping group, others from Amanda's previous expedition, and a few who had been missing for years. Not everyone chose to wake up. Some of the ancient sleepers looked at the world we offered to return them to and chose to sink back into the geological dreams that had sustained them for so long. "That's their choice," Amanda said when I expressed concern about leaving them. "The dreams aren't evil, they're just different. Some people find more peace in the Earth's consciousness than they ever did in human society." The hike back to the surface world was surreal in its own way. As we climbed out of the dream-twisted landscape of the canyon's depths, reality gradually reasserted itself. The impossible flora faded, the upward-flowing streams resumed their normal courses, and the singing flowers fell silent. By the time we reached our RV, the sun was setting on our second day in Palo Duro Canyon. Most of our colleagues had no memory of their time in the Earth's dreams. They thought they'd simply slept very deeply and had unusually vivid dreams about geological processes. "Weird dreams," Martinez said as we packed up the campsite. "I dreamed I was a mountain for about 1,000,000 years. Strangely relaxing. Only Lisa and I retained clear memories of what had happened." We spent the drive back to Dallas processing the experience, trying to make sense of what we'd witnessed and survived. "Are you going to tell anyone?" Lisa asked as we approached the city limits. "Would you believe me if I hadn't been there?" "No, probably not." "Then there's your answer." But the experience had changed us both in ways that became apparent over the following weeks and months. Lisa left the software company to become a park ranger, drawn to spend her time in wild places where the boundary between human consciousness and natural awareness was thin but not overwhelming. I started writing, not code, but stories and poems that tried to capture something of what we'd experienced in those geological dreams. Amanda disappeared shortly after we returned to Dallas. Her apartment was empty, her employment records seemed to vanish from the company's database, and no one could quite remember when she'd started working there. I sometimes wonder if she was ever entirely human, or if she was something else. A guardian, perhaps, or a guide for people who stumbled too close to places where the Earth dreams. That was 5 years ago. I still work in software, but I spend my weekends hiking in state parks and national forests, always alert for places where the world feels a little too peaceful, a little too dreamlike. I've learned to recognize the signs: unusual plant growth, animals that seem too calm, trails that don't appear on official maps. I've found 3 such places so far, and each time I've been able to warn other hikers away to prevent them from falling into the same trap that nearly claimed our camping group. It's become a kind of mission, I suppose, helping people avoid the Earth's dreams while still appreciating the natural world's genuine wonders. Because the Earth does dream, and those dreams are beautiful beyond human comprehension. But they're not meant for us. We have our own dreams to dream, our own consciousness to explore, our own choices to make about what kind of awakeness we want to cultivate. Sometimes, late at night when I'm having trouble sleeping, I can still feel the pull of those geological dreams, the promise of peace, of connection to something vast and eternal, of release from the small anxieties and struggles of human existence. It would be so easy to pack a bag, drive back to Palo Duro Canyon, and let myself sink into that crystalline sleep. But then I remember Lisa's face when she chose to wake up, Amanda's tears when we emerged from the pool, the mixture of relief and loss in the eyes of the people we helped rescue from centuries of dreaming. I remember that consciousness, messy, uncertain, often painful human consciousness, is a gift that comes with the responsibility to remain awake. The Earth will keep dreaming its slow, patient dreams of deep time and gradual change. But we have our own dreams to pursue, our own stories to write, our own choices to make about what kind of beings we want to become. And that, I think, is worth staying awake for. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Catherine Morrison. I had just turned 41 when we arrived at Lost Maple State Natural Area. And it was the worst mistake of our lives. The anniversary trip was supposed to be perfect. 20 years of marriage deserved celebration, and after the hell we'd been through with Michael's cancer treatments, 2 years of chemo, radiation, sleepless nights, and medical bills that had drained our savings, we needed something to remind us why we'd fallen in love in the first place. "Look at this place," Michael had said, showing me photos online of the limestone canyons and cypress-lined streams. "It's like stepping into a postcard. And the fall colors should be perfect this time of year." He was right about that part. Late October in the Texas Hill Country, when the big-tooth maples that gave Lost Maples its name would be turning brilliant shades of red and gold. It was exactly the kind of place where two middle-aged people could reconnect after years of focusing on nothing but survival. We'd rented a modest Class B RV, what they called a van conversion, just big enough for the two of us with a bed, kitchenette, and tiny bathroom. After years of hotel rooms that smelled like disinfectant and waiting rooms that felt like prisons, the idea of having our own mobile sanctuary was incredibly appealing. "This is our second honeymoon," Michael said as we drove west from San Antonio through increasingly rural countryside. His hair had grown back after chemo. Silver now instead of the brown I'd fallen in love with, but his eyes held a light I hadn't seen in 2 years. "Does that make us newlyweds again?" I asked, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "If you want to be." The entrance to Lost Maples was marked by a simple wooden sign that looked like it had been carved decades ago. The ranger station was a small stone building that seemed to grow naturally from the limestone cliffs surrounding it, and the elderly woman who checked us in had the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent in the hill country sun. "Y'all here for the fall colors?" she asked, glancing at our reservation paperwork. "20-year anniversary," Michael replied, putting his arm around my shoulders. "Wanted somewhere special." The ranger's expression grew serious. "Well, you picked a beautiful place. Just be careful if you go hiking after dark. This time of year sound carries funny in the canyons. People hear things that aren't there." "What kind of things?" I asked. "Voices, mostly. Conversations from long ago. The limestone holds on to sound sometimes, plays it back when the conditions are right." She handed us our campsite assignment and a park map. "Site 14. Nice spot by the creek. Just remember, if you hear people talking in the woods at night, don't go looking for them. Sometimes the past is better left alone." Michael and I exchanged amused glances as we drove deeper into the park. "Local folklore," he said. "Every place like this has ghost stories." But as we wound through the narrow canyon roads, following signs to the camping area, I found myself thinking about the ranger's words. There was something unsettling about the way she'd said it, as if she was speaking from personal experience rather than just repeating tourist-friendly legends. Site 14 was everything we'd hoped for. a level spot nestled among towering cypress trees beside a crystal-clear creek. The maples were just beginning to turn, their leaves showing hints of the spectacular color display that would peak in another week or two. It was peaceful and private, exactly what we needed. "Perfect," Michael said as we got the RV set up and connected to the campground's electrical hookup. "I can't believe we waited 20 years to do something like this." That evening, we sat beside the creek in our folding chairs, drinking wine and watching the last light fade from the canyon walls. The water burbled softly over limestone ledges, and somewhere in the trees, an owl called to its mate. It was the most relaxed I'd felt in years. "I love you," Michael said suddenly. "I love you too, more than ever. Even with all the scars, the weight I lost, the way I look like an old man now." I reached over and took his hand, feeling the wedding ring that had become loose during his illness but that he'd refused to resize. "Especially with all of that, it means you fought. It means you stayed." We talked until late, sharing memories from our early days together, making plans for the future now that the cancer was officially in remission. It felt like a rebirth, a chance to rediscover the people we'd been before illness became the defining feature of our lives. I fell asleep that night to the sound of the creek and Michael's steady breathing beside me, more content than I'd been in years. I woke up at 3:33 a.m. to the sound of voices. At first, I thought other campers were having a late-night conversation around their fire, but as I listened more carefully, I realized the voices were coming from multiple directions. Snippets of conversation drifted through the thin walls of our RV, a woman laughing, a man telling a story about fishing, children playing some kind of game. "Michael," I whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. He stirred but didn't wake. The cancer treatments had left him with chronic fatigue, and he slept more deeply now than he ever had before. I got up and looked out the small window above our bed. The campground appeared empty. No lights in the other RVs, no signs of activity. But the voices continued, seeming to come from the creek bed and the woods beyond. Curious, despite the ranger's warning, I put on my robe and stepped outside. The night air was cool and crisp, perfect for sleeping. But the voices were clearer now, and distinctly odd. They had a quality I couldn't quite identify. Not distant exactly, but somehow thin. Like listening to old radio broadcasts played at low volume. "Told you we should have brought more supplies. Creek's running higher than usual this year. Mama, look at the pretty leaves." I followed the voices toward the creek, moving carefully in the darkness. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to navigate without a flashlight. As I got closer to the water, the conversations became more distinct. "Catherine, you shouldn't be out here alone." I spun around, my heart racing. The voice had been clear and close, definitely addressing me by name, but there was no one there. "Catherine, come back to bed. It's dangerous out here." This time, I recognized the voice. It was Michael, but not quite right. The tone was off, too formal, and when I looked back toward our RV, I could see him still sleeping peacefully in our bed. "Michael?" I called softly. "Don't trust the voices," came the reply, but now it sounded like a different person entirely. They're not who they seem to be. Fear crept up my spine like cold fingers. I hurried back to the RV and locked the door behind me, but the voices continued outside. Conversations that seemed to involve dozens of people, all talking at once, all somehow connected to our campsite. I spent the rest of the night lying awake, listening to fragments of discussions that made no sense. People talking about events that had happened decades ago, children playing games that sounded like they were from another era, couples having arguments about long-dead relatives. When Michael woke up at sunrise, I told him what I'd experienced. "Probably just other campers," he said, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Sound carries funny in canyons. You might have been hearing conversations from campsites miles away. "They knew my name, Michael. One of the voices sounded like you." He considered this seriously. Michael had never been one to dismiss my concerns, even when they seemed irrational. It was one of the things I loved most about him. "Let's ask around today," he suggested. "See if any of the other campers heard anything unusual." But when we walked through the campground that morning, we discovered something disturbing. Most of the sites that had appeared occupied the night before were actually empty. RVs and tents that I was certain I'd seen were nowhere to be found, and the few other campers we encountered had no knowledge of late-night conversations. "Strange," said an elderly man walking his dog near the creek. "We've been here 3 days, and you folks are the first other campers we've seen. This place is usually busier, even in late October." "What about Site 7? I asked, pointing to a spot where I was certain I'd seen a large motorhome. There was definitely someone camping there yesterday. The man looked puzzled. "Site 7's been closed all season for repairs. Something about the electrical hookup being damaged." Michael and I walked over to investigate. The site was indeed closed, with orange cones blocking the entrance and a sign indicating electrical problems. But the grass was worn in patterns that suggested recent camping activity, and I found fresh tire tracks in the soft earth near where an RV would have parked. "This is getting weird," Michael said quietly. That afternoon, we decided to explore some of the hiking trails, hoping to shake off the unsettling atmosphere of the previous night. Lost Maples had several well-marked paths that wound through the limestone canyons and along the creek, all offering spectacular views of the fall foliage. The Can Creek Trail was supposed to be an easy 2-mile loop, perfect for our first hike together since Michael's recovery. We packed water and snacks and set off in the early afternoon, when the autumn sun was painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and amber. "This is incredible," Michael said as we paused at a scenic overlook. Below us, the creek wound through a narrow gorge lined with big-tooth maples in various stages of color change. "I can't believe we've lived in Texas all these years and never came here. Better late than never," I replied. But even as I said it, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. We were completely alone on the trail, had been for over an hour, but I kept hearing footsteps behind us, not quite matching our pace, but definitely there. Every time I turned around, the path was empty, but the sound of boots on limestone continued. "Do you hear that?" I asked Michael. He stopped and listened. "Hear what?" "Footsteps. Someone following us." Michael frowned and looked back down the trail. "I don't hear anything, but—" He paused, tilting his head. "Actually, maybe. Very faint." We stood perfectly still for a full minute, listening. The footsteps had stopped, but now we could hear something else. Voices drifting up from the canyon below. Multiple conversations, just like the night before, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "That's what I heard last night," I said. The voices were clearer in the daylight and distinctly unsettling. They had that same thin, radio-like quality, as if they were being played back from some kind of recording, but the content was immediate and personal. Catherine and Michael should turn back. They don't belong here. The anniversary trip was a mistake. We stared at each other in growing alarm. The voices knew our names, knew why we were here, and seemed to be discussing us as if we couldn't hear them. "Let's head back," Michael said quietly, but when we turned around, the trail behind us had changed. The well-marked path we'd been following was gone, replaced by a narrow, rocky track that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. The limestone ledges were covered with moss and lichen, and fallen trees blocked what had been a clear walkway just minutes before. "That's impossible," I said. Michael pulled out the trail map we'd gotten from the ranger station, but the paper was blank, completely white, as if it had never been printed on. "We need to stay calm," he said, but I could hear the edge of panic in his voice. "We'll just follow the creek back to the campground. Water always leads somewhere." But as we made our way down into the canyon, following what should have been a familiar creek bed, the landscape continued to shift around us. Trees appeared and disappeared. The creek changed course multiple times, and trails branched off in directions that shouldn't have existed according to the park map. The voices grew stronger as we got more lost, becoming a constant background chatter of conversations that seemed to span decades. I heard snippets of people discussing camping trips from the 1950s, families planning picnics in the 1970s, couples celebrating anniversaries throughout the decades. "Listen," Michael said suddenly, grabbing my arm. Among the chorus of historical voices, I could hear something that made my blood run cold. It was our own conversation from the night before, playing back like a recording. "I love you. I love you too. More than ever. Especially with all of that." It means you fought. It means you stayed. That's us, I whispered. That's our conversation from last night. But the recorded conversation continued beyond what we'd actually said, branching into words neither of us remembered speaking. But what if the cancer comes back? What if 20 years wasn't enough? What if we're already dead? Stop it, Michael said loudly, addressing the empty canyon. Stop playing our voices back to us. The echo of his words came back distorted, multiplied into a dozen different versions of his voice, all saying slightly different things. Stop it. Start it. You can't stop it. It never stops. We never stop. That's when I realized what was happening. The ranger had been wrong about the limestone holding on to sound. This wasn't some geological phenomenon playing back old conversations. This was something else entirely. Something that was recording us in real time and feeding our words back to us, changed and twisted. The park isn't just holding on to old sounds, I said to Michael. It's creating new ones. It's learning our voices, our words, our thoughts. That's impossible. But even as he said it, we heard his voice echoing back. That's possible. That's probable. That's already happening. The sun was setting, and the canyon was filling with shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. The voices were getting louder, more insistent, and I began to recognize a pattern in the chaos. Every conversation seemed to be from couples on anniversary trips, pairs of people who had come to Lost Maples to celebrate their relationships, only to become trapped in whatever force was collecting and replaying human voices in this place. How many people? I asked the empty air. The answer came back in a dozen different voices, all speaking in unison. All of them. Everyone who ever loved someone here, everyone who ever tried to make memories in this place. We need to find the RV, Michael said. Get out of here. But when we finally made it back to what should have been our campsite, we found something that defied explanation. Our RV was there, but it was also not there. I could see it clearly, sitting in Site 14 exactly where we'd parked it, but when I tried to touch it, my hand passed through it like it was made of mist. What the hell? Michael reached for the door handle, but his fingers went right through the metal. It's like a projection, I said, or a memory. Around us, the campground was filling with similar ghost images, RVs and tents from different time periods, all translucent and untouchable. The voices were coming from these phantom campsites, conversations from all the couples who had ever tried to celebrate their love in this place. We're trapped, Michael said quietly, but I wasn't ready to give up. No. There has to be a way out. There has to be something we're missing. I started walking through the phantom campground, examining the ghost images more carefully. Each site seemed to represent a different couple from a different era, some from the park's early days in the 1970s, others more recent. All of them seemed to be stuck in loops, replaying the same conversations over and over. That's when I noticed something. In every phantom campsite, there was a moment where the conversations changed from happy to confused, from loving to frightened. The moment when each couple realized they were trapped. Michael, look at this. I called him over to a site where the ghostly image of a 1980s-era RV flickered in and out of existence. Listen to what they're saying. The phantom couple was having the same conversation we'd had the night before, talking about their love, their future, their gratitude for surviving some crisis. But then their voices changed, became thin and frightened, as they realized something was wrong. It's the same pattern, I said. Every couple goes through the same sequence. Love, celebration, confusion, fear, and then I gestured at the endless repetition of voices. This. So how do we break the pattern? I thought about it, watching the phantom couples replay their trapped conversations. What if the pattern isn't the trap? What if it's the solution? What do you mean? Every couple that got stuck here was trying to hold on to something. A moment, a feeling, a memory. What if the way out isn't fighting the repetition, but completing it? Moving past the fear to whatever comes next? Michael looked skeptical, but he'd learned to trust my instincts over 20 years of marriage. What do you suggest? We go back to the beginning, to our original conversation by the creek. But this time, We don't get scared when we hear our voices played back. We listen and we respond, and we see where it leads. It sounded insane even as I said it, but every other approach had failed. We made our way back to the creek where our real RV sat, solid and reassuring in the moonlight. I could hear our phantom voices already starting the replay of our anniversary conversation. I love you. I love you too, more than ever. This time, instead of being frightened by the echo, we joined in, speaking along with our recorded voices. But when the conversation branched into fears and doubts we'd never actually expressed, we kept going, following the phantom script. What if the cancer comes back? I said, speaking the words I'd heard our echoes say. What if 20 years wasn't enough? Michael replied. What if we're already dead? But then, instead of stopping there, we continued past the script, speaking our own words. Then we're dead together, I said. And that's enough. 20 years, or 20 minutes, Michael added. If this is all we get, it's still more than most people ever have. The cancer might come back, I acknowledged. But right now, in this moment, we're alive, and we're here, and we love each other. As we spoke these words, our own words, not echoes or phantom conversations, the voices around us began to change. The endless repetition of trapped couples started to fade, replaced by something else. New voices, different voices, speaking words of completion and acceptance. Thank you, said a woman's voice from the 1970s phantom campsite. Thank you for showing us the way. We can go now, said a man from the 1980s site. We can finally go. One by one, the phantom campsites began to disappear, their trapped occupants finally able to move on to whatever came after their endless repetition. The voices faded to whispers, then to silence, until only the natural sounds of the night remained. Did we just exercise a campground? Michael asked. I think we helped people who were stuck move on, I replied, including ourselves. The next morning, we woke up in our real RV, solid and normal and completely functional. The ranger who checked us out was different from the woman who'd checked us in. Younger, with no knowledge of voices in the canyons or sounds that carried strangely. How was your stay? She asked cheerfully. Educational, I said, and Michael squeezed my hand. As we drove away from Lost Maples, I found myself thinking about the couples we'd helped release from their endless loops of fear and repetition. How many people get trapped not by supernatural forces, but by their own inability to move past defining moments, both good and bad. So what did we learn? Michael asked as we merged onto the highway that would take us home. That love isn't about capturing perfect moments, I said. It's about accepting all the moments, perfect and imperfect, and choosing to keep moving forward together. Even if the cancer comes back? Even if the cancer comes back? Even if we only have 20 more years or 20 more days? The point isn't how long we have, it's what we do with the time we're given. That was 3 years ago. Michael's cancer has stayed in remission, and we've taken several more anniversary trips to places where we could celebrate our relationship without getting trapped by our own expectations or fears. But sometimes, late at night when I'm having trouble sleeping, I think about Lost Maples and the couples who spent years or decades replaying the same conversations, trapped by their own inability to move past a single moment of fear or doubt. I think about how easy it would be to get stuck in any number of loops, replaying arguments, rehearsing what-if scenarios, holding on to moments of happiness or pain until they become prisons instead of memories. The real horror isn't supernatural forces that trap us in phantom campsites. It's our own tendency to get caught in cycles of repetition, playing back the same fears and hopes and conversations until we forget that life is supposed to move forward, not just repeat itself endlessly. Love, I've learned, isn't about finding the perfect moment and trying to make it last forever. It's about accepting that every moment is temporary, the good ones and the bad ones, and choosing to keep creating new moments together, even when we don't know what comes next. The voices at Lost Maples are quiet now, but I know they'll return if people come there carrying too much fear, too much attachment to particular outcomes, too much need to control what can't be controlled. But for those who are willing to listen to their own echoes and then speak new words, words of acceptance, of forward movement, of love that doesn't require guarantees, the paths out of the canyon are always open. The creek still flows, the maples still change color, and the limestone still holds on to sound. But it no longer holds on to souls. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go of the need to make love last forever, and instead choose to love fully in whatever time you have. The echoes will always be there, but you don't have to live in them. You can always choose to speak new words. What happened in Kisachi National Forest still doesn't make sense. I'm Elena Vasquez. I was 33 when it happened, and I'm not sure I ever made it out. The food truck festival circuit had been our life for 3 years. Ever since Tom and I bought our converted Airstream and started Abuela's Kitchen, serving my grandmother's traditional Mexican recipes from a gleaming aluminum trailer that had become our home, our business, and our entire world. We followed the festivals from Austin to Houston to Dallas, chasing crowds and good weather, living on the road like modern nomads. But after 18 months of non-stop travel, we were burned out. The constant setup and breakdown, the long drives between venues, the pressure to be on for customers 16 hours a day. It was taking its toll on our relationship and our sanity. "We need a break," Tom said one evening after we'd closed up shop at a disappointing festival in Beaumont. "Somewhere we can just exist for a while. No customers, no schedule, no pressure." I was counting the day's meager receipts and feeling the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach about our finances. We can't afford to take time off. The Austin Food and Wine Festival is next week, and Elena. Tom's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at yourself. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? When's the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about inventory or permits or which festival to hit next?" He was right, of course. The life we'd built was unsustainable, but it was also the only thing standing between us and financial disaster. The food truck had eaten up our savings, and we were barely breaking even most months. "What do you suggest?" I asked. Tom pulled out his phone and showed me photos of a campground deep in East Texas, Kisachi National Forest. It's on the Louisiana border, completely off the beaten path. We could park the RV there for a week, just the two of us. No festivals, no customers. Time to remember why we fell in love with this crazy life in the first place. The photos were beautiful. Towering longleaf pines, clear streams, wilderness that stretched for miles without a single building in sight. It looked like the opposite of everything our life had become. Quiet instead of chaotic, natural instead of commercial, simple instead of complicated. "A week without income," I said. But even as I voiced the objection, I could feel my resistance weakening. A week to save our sanity and our marriage. That last part hit home. We'd been so focused on building our business that we'd forgotten to nurture the relationship that had inspired it in the first place. When we'd started this adventure, it was supposed to be about sharing my family's food traditions while exploring the country together. Somewhere along the way, it had become just another job, one that never ended and followed us home because we lived at work. "Okay," I said. "1 week, but we're taking the truck setup with us. If we find a good spot, maybe we can do some test cooking for new menu items." Tom grinned and kissed me. "Deal. But no advertising, no social media, no trying to turn it into a business opportunity. This is just for us." The drive to Kisachi took us through increasingly rural country, past small towns that looked like they'd been frozen in time since the 1950s. The forest was massive, 600,000 acres of wilderness straddling the Texas-Louisiana border, most of it accessible only by dirt roads that wound through dense stands of pine and hardwood. Our destination was a primitive camping area called Stewart Lake, about as far from civilization as you could get while still having basic amenities like pit toilets and a boat ramp. The ranger who gave us directions was a weathered man in his 60s who looked like he'd spent his entire life in these woods. "Y'all planning to do some fishing?" he asked, glancing at our food truck setup. "Actually, we're in the food business," Tom explained. "Thought we might do some cooking, try out some new recipes." The ranger's expression grew serious. "What kind of food?" "Mexican cuisine. Traditional family recipes. The ranger was quiet for a moment, studying our setup. You might want to be careful about that. Smells carry a long way in these woods, and not everything that might come looking for food is friendly. Bears? I asked. Among other things. This forest has been here a long time, longer than most people realize. Some things in these woods remember when it was different, when the boundaries were more flexible. Tom and I exchanged glances. "What do you mean by boundaries?" he asked. "Between here and there, between now and then, between what's hungry and what's food." The ranger handed us our camping permit. If you do cook, do it during the day. And if anything comes around your campsite at night, anything at all, don't feed it. Some hungers can't be satisfied, only made stronger. We thanked him for the cryptic warning and drove deeper into the forest, following increasingly rough roads that seemed to disappear into green tunnels of overhanging branches. Stewart Lake, when we finally reached it, was exactly what we'd hoped for. A pristine body of water surrounded by towering pines, completely isolated from the modern world. "This is perfect," Tom said as we set up camp in a clearing beside the lake. "I can't believe we're the only ones here." It was strange, actually. The lake was beautiful. The camping facilities were decent, and the weather was perfect for late September. But the campground was completely empty except for us. No other RVs, no tents, not even day hikers. It felt like we'd discovered a secret place that the rest of the world had forgotten. That first evening, as the sun set through the pines and painted the lake surface gold, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. We grilled simple food, just burgers and corn on the cob, and sat by our campfire talking about everything except business. It was exactly what we'd needed. I'd forgotten how quiet the world could be, I said, listening to the gentle lap of water against the shore. "No engines, no crowds, no one asking if we take credit cards," Tom agreed. "This is nice." Around 10 p.m. we heard the first howl. It started low and mournful, somewhere deep in the forest across the lake. At first, I thought it was just a coyote or maybe a dog from some distant house. But as it continued, rising and falling in complex harmonies, I realized it wasn't quite like any animal sound I'd ever heard. "That's unusual," Tom said, poking at our fire with a stick. The howling continued for about 20 minutes, sometimes seeming to come from one direction, sometimes from all around us. Other sounds joined in. Not quite howls, not quite singing, but something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Should we be worried?" I asked. Before Tom could answer, we heard something that made us both freeze. Mixed in with the wild sounds was something that sounded distinctly like human voices. Not words exactly, but the rhythm and cadence of speech, as if people were having conversations in a language made entirely of howls and moans. "Okay, that's creepy," Tom said. The sounds continued for another hour, sometimes close enough that we could hear individual voices in the supernatural chorus, sometimes so distant they might have been imagination. Finally, around midnight, they faded to silence, leaving only the normal night sounds of the forest. "Well, that was unsettling," I said as we prepared for bed. "Probably just animals. Coyotes can make some pretty weird sounds when they're in groups." But neither of us slept well that night. The howling didn't return, but I kept waking up with the feeling that something was watching our RV, waiting just outside the thin aluminum walls that separated us from the forest. The next morning, Tom decided to try out some new recipes on our mobile kitchen setup. "Since we're here and not paying for festival space, might as well experiment a little," he said. I started with something simple, my grandmother's pozole, a traditional hominy soup that required hours of slow cooking. The rich smell of pork and chilies filled the air around our campsite, mixing with the pine scent and the earthy smell of the lake. "God, that smells good," Tom said, checking the propane levels on our cooking setup. "I'd forgotten how much better your food tastes when we're not rushed." By mid-afternoon, I had 3 different dishes going. The pozole, a batch of tamales, and some carnitas that were slow cooking in lard and spices. The aromas were incredible, rich and complex in ways that reminded me of my childhood in my grandmother's kitchen. That's when we noticed we had an audience. At first, it was just a few deer at the edge of the clearing, their noses twitching as they caught the scent of cooking food. That wasn't unusual. Wild animals are always curious about human food smells. But as the afternoon wore on, more animals appeared. Squirrels descended from the trees and sat in a rough circle around our cooking area, their bright eyes fixed on the steaming pots. A family of raccoons emerged from the underbrush and took up positions near our picnic table. Even a few birds, crows and jays mostly, perched in the nearby trees and watched our every move. "That's weird," Tom said, noting how all the animals were maintaining a respectful distance but clearly focusing on our food preparation. "It's like they're waiting for dinner service to start." "Animals can smell food from miles away," I said, but I had to admit their behavior was unusual. They weren't trying to get into our food stores or begging for scraps the way most wild animals did around campsites. They were just waiting, watching, like customers in a very strange restaurant. As the sun began to set, the animal audience grew larger. More deer appeared, along with what looked like wild pigs in the distance, and several red foxes that sat at the very edge of the firelight like well-behaved dogs. "Elena," Tom said quietly, "look at their eyes." I looked and felt a chill run down my spine. Every animal in our woodland audience had the same expression. Not the typical wary alertness of wild creatures, but something that looked almost like intelligence. Like understanding. Like they were listening to a conversation only they could hear. "Maybe we should put the food away," I suggested. But before we could start packing up, the howling began again. This time it was closer. Much closer, and definitely not coming from normal animals. The sounds had a structure to them. A pattern that suggested communication rather than random vocalizations. And as the howling continued, our animal audience began to respond. The deer started making soft, grunting sounds. The squirrels chattered in complex rhythms. The raccoons made trilling noises I'd never heard before. It was as if the entire forest was participating in some kind of primal conversation, with our cooking smells serving as the catalyst. "We need to get inside," Tom said, but even as he spoke, we both realized it might be too late. The tree line around our campsite was moving. Not the trees themselves, but shapes among them. Shadows that were too large to be the animals we'd been watching. Too coordinated to be random wildlife. They stayed just beyond the reach of our campfire light, but I could see dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all focused on our little cooking setup. "What do they want?" I whispered. As if in answer, the howling changed, becoming more structured, more like speech. And gradually, impossibly, I began to understand what they were saying. "Feed us," the voices moaned from the darkness. "We are so hungry. We have been hungry for so long." "That's impossible," Tom said, but I could hear the fear in his voice. "Animals don't talk." But these weren't animals, not exactly. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness beyond our fire, I began to make out shapes that were almost human, but not quite. Tall figures with two long limbs, faces that were almost familiar but stretched wrong, hands that ended in claws or hooves or worse things. "The ranger tried to warn us," I said, remembering his cryptic words about boundaries and hunger. "He said some things in these woods remember when it was different." The shapes pressed closer to our campsite, still maintaining the edge of the light but clearly growing bolder. The normal animals, the deer and squirrels and raccoons, had all backed away, leaving us alone with whatever these things were. "Feed us," the voices continued, now clearly coming from the almost human shapes. "Your food calls to us. Your cooking awakens the old hunger. We don't have enough food for however many of you there are," Tom called toward the darkness. Laughter echoed from the trees, dozens of voices laughing in harmonies that hurt to hear. "Not enough food," they repeated mockingly. "Never enough food. The hunger grows with feeding." One of the shapes stepped into the edge of our firelight, and I had to bite back a scream. It had been human once, maybe. The basic shape was right. 2 arms and 2 legs and a head. But it had been changed, stretched and twisted into something that belonged in nightmares. Its face was a patchwork of different features that didn't quite fit together, and its mouth was far too wide, filled with teeth that belonged to a dozen different animals. "Your grandmother's recipes," it said in a voice like grinding stone. "We smell them in your cooking. We remember those flavors from long ago." "How do you know about my grandmother?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. "We know all the recipes," the creature replied. "Every dish ever cooked in these woods, every meal ever shared. We are the hunger between the trees, and we remember every taste that ever awakened us." More shapes moved into the firelight. A woman with deer antlers growing from her skull, a man whose arms had become the wings of some massive bird, a child whose face kept shifting between human and animal features. All of them had that same wrong look, as if they'd been assembled from pieces that didn't quite belong together. "What are you?" Tom asked. "We are the hungry," the first creature replied. "We are what happens when appetite becomes identity, when the need to consume overwhelms everything else. Your cooking calls to us because it carries the old memories, the traditional ways of preparing food that our kind remembers from before." Before what? Before we forgot how to be satisfied. Before the hunger became all we were. I looked at our cooking setup, the pozole still simmering, the tamales warming, the carnitas rich with the smell of spices and slow-cooked meat. It was food prepared with love and tradition, recipes passed down through generations of my family. And somehow, that traditional preparation had awakened something ancient and terrible in these woods. "If we feed you, will you leave us alone?" I asked, more of that horrible laughter. "Feed us, and we grow stronger. Refuse to feed us, and we grow hungrier. There is no choice that leads to satisfaction. Then what do you want from us?" The creatures looked at each other with expressions that might have been anticipation. "We want you to cook for us," the first one said. "Forever. Your recipes, your traditions, your skills. They awaken flavors we had forgotten we craved. Stay with us, become our cooks, and we will make you part of our hunger. And if we refuse, then you become the food instead of the cooks." The circle of creatures pressed closer, and I could see that there were far more of them than I'd initially realized. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all watching us with eyes that held nothing but endless, unsatisfiable appetite. "We need time to think," Tom said. "Time," the creatures repeated, and I heard something like humor in their voices. "Time is what we have. Eternity of hunger, eternity of never being filled. Think as long as you wish, we will wait." The creatures melted back into the shadows, but I could feel them watching, waiting, surrounding our small island of light in the vast darkness of the forest. The normal animals had all disappeared, leaving only the sound of our own breathing and the gentle bubbling of the pozole. "We have to get out of here," Tom whispered. "How? They're all around us. And even if we could get to the RV, we'd never make it out of the forest. They know these woods better than we do." Tom looked at our cooking setup, then at the darkness where the creatures waited. "Maybe we don't have to choose between feeding them and being eaten." "What do you mean?" "Look at them. They're hungry, but they're also lost. They said they forgot how to be satisfied, right? What if the problem isn't that they can't be fed, but that they've forgotten what it means to enjoy food instead of just consuming it?" I thought about my grandmother, about the way she'd taught me to cook. It wasn't just about following recipes. It was about understanding that food was a way of sharing love, of creating connection, of nourishing more than just the body. You think we can teach them? I think we have to try, because the alternative is becoming like them, either consumed by hunger or consumed as food. I looked at the pozole, rich with tradition and memory, prepared with techniques passed down through generations. My grandmother used to say that the secret ingredient in any dish was the love you put into it. She said food without love was just fuel, but food prepared with care could heal hearts as well as bodies. Then let's see if we can heal whatever broke these things. We called the creatures back to our fire and they came willingly, eager for whatever we might offer. But instead of just serving them food, I began to talk as I ladled out portions of pozole. "This is pozole," I said, handing a bowl to the first creature. My great-grandmother created this recipe during the Depression, when there wasn't enough food to go around. She learned to make a little bit of everything stretch to feed a lot of people. But more than that, she learned to put hope into the cooking. Every bowl was a promise that things would get better. The creature took the bowl with hands that shook with hunger, but instead of devouring the contents immediately, it paused and listened. The hominy represents abundance, I continued, serving the others. The meat represents strength. The chilies represent passion and warmth. But the real ingredient, the one that makes it more than just soup, is the intention to nourish, not just to fill. One by one, the creatures began to eat, but something changed in the way they consumed the food. Instead of the desperate, mindless feeding I'd expected, they ate slowly, thoughtfully, as if they were remembering something they'd lost long ago. "It tastes like," the first creature said, and its voice was different now, more human. "It tastes like comfort, like being welcomed home." "Food should comfort," I said, serving tamales next. "These are made with mesa that I prepare by hand, corn that's been treated with lime the way my ancestors did thousands of years ago. Each one is wrapped individually, cooked with patience, prepared as an act of love." As the creatures ate, their appearances began to change. The patchwork features settled into more harmonious arrangements. The wrong proportions corrected themselves. The animal parts receded, revealing the human beings they had once been. "We remember now," said the woman who had worn deer antlers. "We were hungry, yes, but we were hungry for more than food. We were hungry for connection, for meaning, for the love that makes a meal more than just consumption." "What happened to you?" Tom asked. "We forgot," replied the man whose arms had been wings. "We came to these woods seeking something. Adventure, solitude, escape. But we brought our emptiness with us, our modern hunger for more, always more. The forest fed on that hunger, amplified it, until we became nothing but appetite without purpose. The boundary, the ranger mentioned, I realized. It's not between here and there. It's between satisfied and hungry, between nourishment and consumption." The creatures, now clearly revealed as people who had been lost to their own endless appetite, continued eating with mindful attention to flavor and texture and the love that had gone into the preparation. With each bite, they became more human, more complete. "We haven't tasted food like this in— How long have we been here?" asked someone who looked like they might have been a hiker once. "Time moves differently when you're always hungry," replied another. "Always searching for the next meal, the next taste, the next thing to fill the emptiness. But this fills more than the stomach." We cooked through the night, not just the food I'd prepared, but new dishes, teaching the rescued people how to prepare meals with intention and love rather than just to satisfy appetite. As dawn broke through the pines, the last of the monstrous hunger faded from their eyes. "We can go now," said the first creature, now clearly a middle-aged man who might have been a businessman or teacher before he'd become lost to hunger. "The forest no longer holds us because we remember the difference between eating and being nourished." "Where will you go?" I asked. "Home," he said simply. "Back to the lives we left behind when we thought we needed something more. But now we understand that the more we were seeking was never about having more things or more experiences. It was about being more present with what we already had." One by one, the people thanked us and walked into the forest. Not as creatures of endless hunger, but as human beings who had remembered the difference between appetite and satisfaction. As the sun rose fully above the trees, Tom and I found ourselves alone beside the lake, surrounded by the remnants of our impromptu cooking session. "Did that really happen?" Tom asked. I looked at the empty bowls, the exhausted cooking equipment, the trampled ground where dozens of people had gathered around our fire. "I think we just learned something important about our food truck business." "What's that?" "We've been so focused on making money that we forgot why we started cooking in the first place. Food isn't just a product. It's a way of sharing love, creating connection, nourishing people's souls as well as their bodies." Tom nodded slowly. "The hungry. They were what we might have become if we'd kept treating food as just another commodity instead of remembering its real purpose." We packed up our camping gear and drove back toward civilization, but something fundamental had changed in our approach to the food truck business. We still followed the festival circuit, but now we focused on creating genuine connections with our customers, sharing the stories behind our recipes, making sure that every meal carried the love and intention that my grandmother had taught me. The business became more successful than it had ever been, but more importantly, it became fulfilling again. We weren't just selling food. We were sharing traditions, creating moments of comfort and joy, nourishing people in ways that went far beyond mere nutrition. That was 2 years ago. We still visit Kisatchie National Forest sometimes, usually during the off-season when we need to reconnect with the lessons we learned that night. The campground is busier now. Apparently, word has gotten out about what a beautiful, peaceful place Stewart Lake is for camping. But I never cook there anymore. Some hungers are better left sleeping, and some boundaries are worth respecting. The forest taught us what we needed to know about the difference between consumption and nourishment, between taking and giving, between feeding appetites and feeding souls. Sometimes late at night, when we're parked at a festival and I'm preparing food for the next day's service, I can still hear echoes of that night in the forest. Not the monstrous howling of the hungry, but the grateful voices of people who remembered what it meant to be truly nourished. And I make sure that every dish we serve carries that same intention, to feed not just the body, but the heart and soul as well. Because in a world full of empty consumption, sometimes the most radical act is to offer food prepared with genuine love. The hunger between the trees is always waiting for those who forget the difference, but for those who remember that the best meals nourish more than just appetite. The forest offers a different kind of sustenance, the satisfaction that comes from feeding others with intention, love, and respect for the sacred act of sharing food. That's a hunger worth satisfying, and a boundary worth protecting. What happened in Devil's River still doesn't make sense. I'm Marcus Wheeler. I was 38 when it happened, and I'm not sure I ever made it out. The hunting trip was supposed to be our last hurrah before everything changed. My brother Jake was shipping out to Afghanistan in 3 weeks, his second deployment, and this time he'd be gone for 15 months. Our friend Tommy had just gotten engaged, and his fiancée was already making noises about him giving up hunting and dangerous hobbies. And me? I was facing a messy divorce that would probably cost me half of everything I'd worked for, including the custom hunting RV that had been my pride and joy for the past 5 years. One more trip, Jake had said when he called to propose the idea. Just the 3 of us, like the old days, Devil's River country, where we went that time in high school. I remembered that trip. We'd been 17, full of testosterone and terrible decisions, and we'd spent a week in the remote canyons of southwest Texas hunting javelina and deer. It had been one of those perfect adventures that bind friends together for life. Campfires under impossible stars, successful hunts, and the kind of male bonding that becomes impossible once wives and mortgages and adult responsibilities take over. Devil's River, I repeated, already feeling the pull of nostalgia. That's some rough country. Rougher now, Jake said. Tommy's been doing research. Says the state bought up a bunch of the private land around there, turned it into a wildlife management area. Fewer people than ever, which means better hunting, Tommy added. He was on speakerphone from his apartment in San Antonio. I've got connections at parks and wildlife. We can get permits for a primitive camping area that's usually off limits. Place called Dolan Creek. Middle of nowhere, no facilities, just us and whatever we can carry in. The RV made it practical. My 38-foot Winnebago destination was equipped for off-grid camping, with solar panels, a generator, and enough water storage for a week. We could push deep into the backcountry and still have all the comforts of home. When? I asked, already knowing I was in. Next weekend. Tommy can get us a 5-day permit, Thursday through Monday. What do you say? What I said was yes, because sometimes you need to grab hold of the good things in life before they slip away forever. The drive from Austin to Devil's River country took us through increasingly desolate terrain. We left the interstate at Junction, then took state highways that got progressively narrower and less maintained. By the time we turned onto the dirt road that would take us to Dolan Creek, we hadn't seen another vehicle for 20 miles. "Jesus, this place hasn't changed," Tommy said, looking out at the endless expanse of limestone hills covered in scrub oak and juniper. "Still looks like the surface of Mars." He wasn't wrong. This part of Texas was harsh and unforgiving. All thorns and rocks and brutal sun, carved into maze-like canyons by millions of years of flash floods. It was beautiful in its own stark way, but it was beauty that could kill you if you weren't careful. The road to Dolan Creek was barely more than a track, winding through arroyos and over caliche ridges that tested even the RV's heavy-duty suspension. We passed a few old hunting camps, weathered trailers and rusty stock tanks, but most looked abandoned, claimed back by the desert. "There," Jake said, pointing to a hand-painted sign barely visible through the brush. "Dolan Creek Wildlife Management Area. Primitive camping by permit only." The camping area was a small clearing beside a mostly dry creek bed, surrounded by dense thickets of mesquite and prickly pear. It was completely isolated. No power lines, no cell towers, no signs of human presence except for a fire ring made from stacked limestone rocks and a single picnic table that looked like it had been built sometime during the Carter administration. "Home, sweet home," I said, maneuvering the RV into position. We spent the rest of the day setting up camp and scouting the area. The creek bed showed signs of recent water flow, and we found fresh deer tracks in the sandy bottom. Turkey sign was everywhere, and Tommy spotted a small herd of axis deer on a distant ridge. "This is going to be good," Jake said as we sat around the campfire that evening, drinking beer and planning our hunts. "I can feel it. The night sounds were incredible. Coyotes calling from the ridges, great horned owls hooting in the mesquites, and the distant scream of what might have been a mountain lion. The stars were magnificent, a dense carpet of light unmarred by any hint of civilization. "Remember that story the old-timer told us?" Tommy said as we sat watching the fire burn down to coals. "About why they call it Devil's River," I remembered. We'd stopped for gas in a little town that probably doesn't exist anymore, and the ancient attendant had regaled us with local folklore while he filled our tank. "Something about Spanish explorers," I said. "They came through here in the 1600s looking for gold. Most of them died. Heat, thirst, Comanche raids. The few survivors said the land itself was cursed, that the devil lived in the canyons. Lot of people have died out here over the years," Jake added. "Ranchers, hunters, illegal immigrants trying to cross from Mexico. Easy to get lost, easier to die of thirst or exposure." "Cheerful thoughts," Tommy muttered, but he was grinning. Perfect bedtime stories. That first night passed without incident. I woke once around 3 a.m. to the sound of something large moving through the brush near the RV, but when I looked out the window, I saw nothing but moonlit desert. Probably just a deer or javelina coming down to the creek for water. The first day of hunting was everything we'd hoped for. Jake got a nice 8-point whitetail just after sunrise, and Tommy missed a shot at what he swore was a record book axis deer. I didn't see anything worth shooting, but I enjoyed the peace and solitude of moving through the canyons with my rifle, listening to the desert wake up around me. We spent the afternoon processing Jake's deer and hanging the meat in the RV's refrigerated compartment. The sun was brutal, over 100 degrees by midday. But the desert had its own harsh beauty. Ancient limestone cliffs rose from narrow valleys choked with thorny vegetation, and every canyon seemed to hide secrets in its shadowed depths. "You know what's weird?" Tommy said as we sat in the RV's air conditioning, escaping the afternoon heat. "I haven't seen any other hunters. Usually there's at least a few other groups in areas like this." "That's what makes it special," Jake replied. "Tommy's connections got us into a place most people never see." But I'd noticed it too. In all our years of hunting in Texas, we'd never been anywhere this isolated. Even the most remote ranch or lease usually had some signs of human activity. Other hunters, ranch hands, game wardens checking licenses. Here, there was nothing. Just us in the desert and a silence so profound it felt alive. That evening, as we sat around the fire cleaning our rifles and telling stories, we heard something that made us all stop talking. It was singing. The voice was faint and distant. seeming to come from somewhere up one of the canyons. It was a woman's voice, high and sweet, singing what sounded like a lullaby in a language I didn't recognize. The melody was beautiful, but somehow unsettling, with intervals that didn't quite fit together in ways that human ears were used to hearing. "What the hell is that?" Tommy whispered. We listened in silence for maybe 5 minutes. The singing continued, sometimes louder, sometimes so faint we could barely hear it. It seemed to move around the canyon walls, echoing in ways that made it impossible to pinpoint the source. "Maybe hikers," Jake suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Hikers don't usually camp out here," I said, "and that doesn't sound like any camping song I've ever heard." The singing faded gradually, leaving us in the normal night sounds of the desert. But something had changed. The coyotes had gone quiet, and even the insects seemed more subdued. "Probably just some Mexican nationals passing through," Tommy said, trying to sound casual. "People cross through this country all the time, heading north." It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't explain the chill that ran down my spine when I heard that voice, or the way the desert seemed to hold its breath while the singing continued. The second night, things got stranger. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of the RV's water pump cycling on and off. That was unusual. The pump only ran when someone was using water, and all 3 of us were in our bunks. I lay there listening for a few minutes, then got up to investigate. The kitchen faucet was running at full pressure, sending a steady stream of water into the sink. I turned it off, checked the bathroom. Nothing. The pump cycled off, and silence returned. "Probably just water pressure fluctuation," I muttered to myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had turned on that faucet deliberately. I was heading back to bed when I heard it again, the singing. This time it was closer, much closer, coming from right outside the RV. I moved to the window and peered out through the blinds. A woman was standing beside our dead campfire, maybe 20 feet from the RV. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the moonlight. She wore a simple white dress that looked like something from another century, and she was singing that same haunting lullaby we'd heard the night before. But there was something wrong with her. She stood perfectly still as she sang, not swaying or moving the way people naturally do, and her feet. I couldn't see her feet. The dress seemed to extend all the way to the ground, but there was no sign of feet or legs underneath. I watched her for maybe 10 minutes, transfixed by the beauty of her voice and the impossibility of her presence. Where had she come from? We were at least 30 miles from the nearest road, 50 miles from the nearest town. No one could have walked here through that brutal desert terrain, especially not dressed like that. The singing stopped abruptly, and the woman turned to look directly at the RV. Her eyes found mine through the window, and I saw that they were completely black. Not just dark, but black like pools of oil, reflecting the moonlight. She smiled, showing teeth that were too white and too sharp, and raised one pale hand to wave at me. I jerked back from the window, my heart pounding. When I looked again a few seconds later, she was gone. I spent the rest of the night sitting at the dinette table, drinking coffee and watching the windows. But the woman didn't return, and gradually the normal sounds of the desert resumed. Coyotes calling from the ridges, the rustle of small animals in the brush. "You look like hell," Jake observed when he got up at sunrise. I told them about the woman, about the singing and the black eyes and the impossible smile. They listened without interrupting, but I could see the skepticism in their faces. "You sure you weren't dreaming?" Tommy asked gently. I was wide awake. I saw her clear as I'm seeing you right now. "Okay, let's say there was someone out there," Jake said. "Maybe a hiker who got separated from her group, or someone having a mental health crisis. People do weird things when they're dehydrated or suffering from heat exhaustion." It was a rational explanation, but it didn't account for the woman's otherworldly appearance or the way she'd simply vanished. And it definitely didn't explain the faucet turning itself on. We spent that day hunting separately, each of us working different canyons. I had trouble concentrating, kept looking over my shoulder and listening for that haunting song. The desert felt different now, more watchful, more aware. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats, and every sound made me jump. Tommy got his axis deer that afternoon, a beautiful animal with a perfect rack. We should have been celebrating, but there was a tension in camp now that none of us wanted to acknowledge. We were all on edge, all waiting for something we couldn't name. That evening, as we were cooking Tommy's backstrap over the fire, we heard vehicles approaching. The sound of engines and grinding gears echoed off the canyon walls, growing steadily louder. "Finally," Tommy said with obvious relief. "Other people?" But when the vehicles came into view, my heart sank. 2 Border Patrol trucks were bouncing down the rough track toward our camp, their light bars flashing. The agents who got out were professional but tense. The older one, a Hispanic man with sergeant's stripes, approached our fire while his partner stayed by the trucks. "Evening, gentlemen. I'm Sergeant Ruiz, Border Patrol. We need to ask you a few questions." "Sure thing," Jake said. "Everything okay?" "We've had reports of unusual activity in this area. People seeing lights, hearing voices. You men notice anything strange?" I exchanged glances with Jake and Tommy. "What kind of strange?" I asked. "Folks claiming to see a woman in white walking around the canyons at night, singing. Some of the local ranchers are spooked." Ruiz studied our faces carefully. "You haven't seen anything like that?" "There was singing," I admitted. "Last couple of nights. Sounded like a woman, but we couldn't see where it was coming from." Ruiz nodded grimly. "How long you boys planning to stay out here?" "Through Monday," Tommy said. "Is there a problem?" "Maybe. We've had 3 people go missing in this area over the past year. All men, all experienced outdoorsmen who knew the country. They just disappeared." "Disappeared how?" Jake asked. "Left their camps in the middle of the night. Sometimes we'd find their vehicles, sometimes not. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Like they just walked out into the desert and kept walking." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you think happened to them?" Ruiz was quiet for a moment, staring into our fire. "Officially, heat exposure, dehydration, maybe animal predation. Unofficially?" He shrugged. "My grandmother grew up in this country. She had stories about La Llorona, the weeping woman. Said she haunts places where people died of thirst, lures men to their deaths." "You believe that?" Tommy asked. "I believe this is a dangerous place that's claimed a lot of lives over the years. I believe smart men sometimes do stupid things when they're alone in the desert for too long." He stood up, brushing dust off his uniform. "Just be careful. Stay close to camp at night, and if you hear that woman singing, don't go looking for her." The Border Patrol agents left, but their visit had changed the atmosphere in our camp. We sat around the fire for another hour, but conversation was strained and nobody felt like telling stories or jokes. "Maybe we should head out tomorrow," Tommy suggested. "Call it a successful hunt and go home early." 2 days early? Jake shook his head. "Come on, man. Some local folklore and a couple of missing persons cases don't mean we're in danger." "The faucet turned itself on last night," I said quietly. "I saw a woman with black eyes standing right where you're sitting. That's not folklore." Jake looked at me with concern. "Marcus, you've been under a lot of stress with the divorce. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're—" "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't tell me it was stress or imagination. I know what I saw." We went to bed that night with tension thick between us. Jake and Tommy thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe they were right. Maybe the stress of the divorce, combined with the isolation and the desert heat, was making me see things that weren't there. But when I woke up at 3 a.m. to find all 3 of our rifles missing from their case, I knew something real was happening. "Jake! Tommy!" I shook them awake. "The guns are gone." We searched the RV from top to bottom, then expanded our search to the campsite. Nothing. 3 expensive hunting rifles had simply vanished from inside our locked RV. "This is bullshit," Jake said, his military training kicking in. "Someone's screwing with us, playing games." "Who?" Tommy demanded. "We're in the middle of nowhere." That's when we heard her singing again. This time the voice was coming from multiple directions at once. From the creek bed, from the ridge above us, from the dark mouths of canyons on either side of our camp. It was the same haunting lullaby, but now it was a chorus of voices, all singing in perfect harmony. There, Jake pointed toward the creek. Do you see her? I looked where he was pointing and felt my blood turn to ice. The woman in white was standing in the dry creek bed, her pale dress glowing in the moonlight. But she wasn't alone. There were others with her, men in various states of decay, their clothes hanging in tatters, their faces gaunt with thirst and exposure. The missing people, I whispered. As we watched, the ghostly figures began to move toward our camp, walking with that same unnatural stillness I'd observed in the woman. They surrounded the RV, their dead eyes reflecting the light from our windows. The woman raised her hand, and I saw she was holding Jake's rifle. She pointed it at the RV, but instead of threatening us, she seemed to be beckoning us to come outside and join them. "Nobody move," Jake whispered. "Nobody goes outside." But even as he said it, I could feel the pull of that otherworldly song. Part of me wanted to open the door, to walk out into the desert night and follow that beautiful voice wherever it might lead. The rational part of my mind screamed warnings, but the singing seemed to bypass rational thought entirely, speaking to something deeper and more primitive. Tommy was already reaching for the door handle. "No." I grabbed his wrist. "Fight it! Don't listen to the song." Tommy blinked, seeming to come back to himself. What was I doing? "You were about to go outside. They're trying to lure us out there." The singing grew louder, more insistent. Through the windows I could see more figures materializing from the darkness. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Men, women, even children, all wearing the clothes of different eras. Spanish conquistadors in rusted armor, cowboys in leather chaps, modern hikers in Gore-Tex and fleece. All of them dead, all of them singing that hypnotic lullaby. "This can't be real," Tommy muttered, but he was staring out the window with wide eyes. The woman in white approached the RV's door. She raised her hand and knocked. 3 slow, deliberate raps that echoed through the aluminum walls like gunshots. "Don't answer it," Jake said, but his voice sounded distant, dreamy. She knocked again, and this time the door's lock clicked open by itself. "The keys," I said urgently. "Where are the keys?" Jake fumbled for the ignition keys while I grabbed the wheel. The engine turned over on the first try, and I threw the RV into gear without waiting for anyone to secure the camp. We lurched forward, scattering the ghostly figures like mist, but as we accelerated down the rough track, I could see them in the mirrors, not running after us but flowing like water, keeping pace with our vehicle despite the impossibility of it. "They're following us," Tommy said, staring out the rear window. "Just shadows," Jake insisted, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the dashboard. We drove through the night, following the winding dirt road back towards civilization. But the road seemed different now, longer than it had been on the way in, with turns and forks I didn't remember. Every time I checked the mirrors, I could see pale figures flowing along behind us, never quite catching up, but never falling behind either. Dawn came slowly, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. As the sun rose higher, the ghostly figures began to fade, becoming transparent in the growing light. By full daylight, they were gone entirely. "We made it," Tommy said, slumping back in his seat. But I wasn't so sure. The road ahead looked wrong, too straight, too well-maintained for the primitive track we'd been following. And when we finally reached what should have been the junction with the state highway, there was nothing there but more desert. "Where the hell are we?" Jake demanded, studying the GPS unit. The screen showed nothing but static. We drove for hours, following roads that appeared and disappeared, passing landmarks that seemed familiar but were never quite where they should be. The sun tracked across the sky, but time seemed fluid, elastic. Sometimes minutes felt like hours, other times hours passed in what felt like seconds. It was Tommy who first voiced what we were all thinking. "We're not getting out, are we? This is what happened to those other men. They thought they escaped, but they never really left. That's impossible," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled over beside a cluster of barrel cacti and shut off the engine. In the sudden silence, I could hear it again. Faint and distant, but unmistakable. The woman's voice, singing her haunting lullaby. "She's still with us," I said. We sat in the air-conditioned comfort of the RV, watching the desert shimmer in the heat. listening to that impossible song. Our cell phones had no signal. The GPS showed only static. The road behind us had vanished, leaving nothing but unmarked desert in all directions. "So, what do we do?" Tommy asked. I looked at my friends, Jake with his soldier's bearing and steady eyes, Tommy with his engineer's mind always looking for logical solutions, and realized we were way beyond logic now. We'd stumbled into something ancient and hungry, something that fed on the loneliness and desperation of men lost in the vastness of the Texas desert. "We survive," I said finally. "We stick together, we don't listen to the singing, and we find a way out." But even as I said it, I could feel the desert's pull growing stronger. The woman's voice was beautiful, hypnotic, promising rest and peace and an end to all earthly troubles. Part of me wanted to open the door, to walk out into that blazing heat and follow the song to whatever destination it offered. That was 3 years ago. We're still here, still driving the endless roads of a desert that exists somewhere between reality and nightmare. The RV never runs out of fuel, never breaks down, never shows signs of wear despite the thousands of miles we've covered. We don't get hungry or thirsty, don't age or change. We just drive and wait and listen to the singing that never stops. Sometimes we see other travelers, RVs and pickup trucks with confused occupants who took a wrong turn somewhere and ended up in this place that isn't quite a place. Most of them join the ghostly chorus eventually, unable to resist the beautiful voice that promises peace beneath the desert sand. Jake lasted the longest. His military training, his discipline, his stubborn refusal to give up, all of it helped him resist for almost 2 years. But eventually, even he walked out into the night, following the woman in white into whatever realm of shadows she calls home. Tommy went next, drawn by the promise of solving the puzzle, of understanding the mystery that trapped us here. He kissed me goodbye and walked into the desert with a smile on his face, humming along with the eternal lullaby. Now it's just me, driving the empty roads of Devil's River country, watching the sun rise and set over landscapes that never quite look the same twice. The woman in white sits in the passenger seat sometimes, singing her hypnotic songs and showing me glimpses of the peace that waits beyond the veil. I know I'll join her eventually. The loneliness is getting harder to bear, and her songs are getting more beautiful with each passing day. The desert is patient. It can wait forever for its prey to come willingly into its embrace. But not yet. Not today. Today, I'll keep driving. Keep searching for a road that leads back to the world of the living, because maybe, just maybe, there's still a way out of this place where the devil makes his home among the thorns and stones of West Texas. And if you're reading this, if somehow these words have found their way back to the real world, then remember this warning. Stay away from Devil's River country. Don't let the beauty of the desert fool you into thinking it's safe. Some places are hungry, and some songs are too beautiful to resist. The woman in white is singing to me now, her voice sweet as honey and cold as desert night. She's telling me about a place where the hunting is always good, where friends never grow apart, where the sun never sets on perfect days that last forever. It sounds wonderful. Maybe it's time to stop running and listen to what she has to say. The keys are still in the ignition, but I don't think I need them anymore. The desert is calling, and I'm finally ready to answer. If you ever find an abandoned RV in the middle of nowhere, don't look for the owners. Don't follow the singing you might hear on the wind. Just walk away and don't look back. Some roads are meant to be traveled alone, and some songs are meant to lead you home.